from the 2008 Atheist Alliance International Convention and the promenade deck of the Queen Mary. Good evening and welcome to New York City Atheists Live on Tape, brought to you by New York City Atheists. I'm your host, Dennis Horvitz, the David Letterman of the Hopelessly Damned. Our guest is Dr. Herbert Silverman, and I would actually need a whole show just to run off this list of accomplishments, but he is the president of the Secular Coalition for America. He is a professor of mathematics at the University of Charleston in South Carolina. He is a regular columnist for the magazine Secular Nation, and he is here today in his capacity as the co-master of ceremonies of the 2008 Atheists Alliance International Convention. So I want to welcome you, Herb.
It's good to be here.
And we're all kind of super cash because you have to be on our ship. And just generally, I guess the first thing I'd like to ask is, what kind of progress do you think the secular movement has made, say, in the last 10 years? What do you think? How far have we gone?
I think in large part because of our country becoming more theological, I think we are making progress. I think a lot of the people who aren't on the religious right but still are religious are coming along to view our values, our rational way of working, as a more reasonable way than what's been happening in the latest administration. Right.
Well, which actually leads me to the question: do you think that the trend over, say, the last 10, well, even longer, the last, I would guess it'd be almost 30 years, if not more, the trend towards theocracy, do you think that has that helped or hindered the movement, so to speak?
Well, it's hurt our country, but I think it's helped different atheist, humanist groups get over their internal bickering and decide, hey, this country is in distress, we need to start cooperating. So we're no longer fighting about which word to use, humanist or atheist or freethinker, but we're cooperating on the 95% we've always agreed on and showing our strength in numbers to try to help change our culture.
So has there, at least from your perspective, has there been any kind of outreach, as you mentioned before, there are even believers now who are getting sick of this whole thing. Has there been any, or is there planned any outreach to believers to kind of join us in this movement?
Yeah, well, the Secular Coalition for America consists of 9 non-theistic organizations, but we do cooperate with organizations like the ACLU, or Americans United for Church and State, which has both religious and non-religious members. And we also cooperate on selective issues with religious organizations that share some of our values on specific items like separation of church and state, and other issues that we feel is more evidence-based than faith-based.
Now, going specifically to the issue of church and state, you were instrumental in getting the Supreme Court of South Carolina to strike down the religious test requirement for holding public office. Now, I thought that religious tests were made illegal when the Constitution of the United States was ratified. Maybe even could you just kind of recount for us that whole incident of how you got them to strike that down, and
sure.
What happened?
Well, as mentioned, I'm a professor at the College of Charleston in South Carolina, and a colleague pointed out to me that our state constitution prohibits or says that one cannot hold public office if you're an atheist. So I went to the ACLU there thinking that it was obviously unconstitutional, it could be struck down easily, and I was told the only way to change our Constitution is to challenge it and run for public office. So I declared for governor of South Carolina with the purpose of just changing the Constitution, thinking in my political naivete that the current governor would say, oh, of course, that needs to be changed. But they said, you know, this is what our founders wanted. We're a religious country. So it took a 7-year battle first running for governor, where the judge, who was appointed by Strom Thurmond, said that he'd only rule on the merits of the case if I won the election, which of course I didn't. So then I applied to be a notary public, another public office where you don't have to win an election. Again, I was turned down, and they said they wouldn't give reasons, knowing if they did, it would be obviously unconstitutional. And it went to the state Supreme Court, which eventually ruled unanimously what they should have said all along, that our Constitution prohibits religious tests for public office, and our national Constitution trumps our state Constitution. So now atheists can be notary public or even become governor if they can marshal enough votes.
Well, Jesse Ventura is an atheist, and he was governor of Minnesota. So,
Minnesota and South Carolina are quite a bit different. We're trying to make South Carolina more like Minnesota, and even Minnesota and the rest of the country more secular than it is now.
Right. Let me ask you, just in your opinion, why do you think that states like such as South Carolina and some of the other states, which still to this day have religious test requirements permissible in their Constitution, how have they gotten away with it so long when it's clearly illegal, unconstitutional with the national Constitution?
Well, I think a lot of our politicians recognize that it's illegal, but would rather pander to the religious right and get votes than do the right thing. They've also lost other test cases, like they would put our Ten Commandments on our state buildings, knowing that it was illegal, but this is a way to get reelected. And never mind that it costs taxpayers all that additional money. And South Carolina isn't a rich state. We could certainly use that for education and for promoting science, which we tend to ignore.
Right. Well, what is that? And speaking of education, what kind of is where's the evolution creationist debate? Where is that in South Carolina?
Well, like other states, they've changed the word from creationist to intelligent design, but everything else is the same. So we continually are battling the legislature, and we tend to be winning in theory, that they're not allowed to teach creationism per se in science classes, even though some teachers do. But the problem is the textbooks they're using tend not to even mention the word evolution, because they call that a controversy. And it is, but it's a political controversy. It's not a scientific controversy. So our students really aren't learning much about evolution, and we try to, of course, combat the idea it's just a theory, just like gravity is just a theory.
Well, in some ways, it's understandable when you bring up the word theory, because theory does have one meaning in the scientific sense and another meaning in the colloquial sense. And people, I think a lot of people are unaware that the term theory is scientifically means an explanation of the facts, and it makes predictions.
You start with a hypothesis, and then you need to get enough evidence to elevate it to a theory. Intelligent design or creationism is not elevated to the point of being a theory. My research area in mathematics is called geometric function theory, and there's a wide basis of information known, but it's not yet complete, which is why it's called a theory. Evolution and gravity is not complete either, but there's consensus that that is real. And the only difference between my area, geometric function theory, and evolution is that my mathematical area doesn't conflict with the fundamentalist view of the Bible, so they leave us alone. That's not the case with evolution.
Right. Well, you know, I kind of feel a little bit nervous next to you, because I flunked math in 8th grade,
But you're a rational thinker, and that's what we try to instill in all of our students, to go with the evidence.
Right, and that's what that was my ticket into the convention, too, being a rational person.
There's a lot of science I'm totally ignorant of and dependent on others to explicate, but I'm willing to have faith in the scientific community, that they look at referee papers and when there's a consensus, I tend to go along with it. When more evidence comes, maybe things change, but I don't want to go to a book written 3,000 years ago for the evidence.
Yeah, by people who are describing reality with less knowledge than the average 12-year-old in the United States. Even as bad as our educational system is right now, the average 12-year-old knows more about reality than the writers of the Bible.
You know, I was in a debate with a fundamentalist preacher in South Carolina about this, talking about the latest scientific evidence, and he said, there's only one book we need, and that's the Bible. So that makes it very easy to learn about everything, and also easy to remain ignorant.
Right. Well, and I think a lot of people don't understand too that going back to what you said before about writing theories and proclaiming theories based on evidence is that generally there's really no such thing as absolute scientific proof. Scientific truth is provisional, and our theories are stay the way they are unless and until we have reason to believe otherwise.
Yeah, the irony is a lot of religious people call themselves humble and scientists arrogant, whereas we're saying we don't know for sure. This is the best evidence we have at this point. And like the Secular Coalition is trying to say, our administration should be more evidence-based. We went into a faith-based war. We have faith-based science that says that abstinence only is the best procedure, even though we have reams of data saying that doesn't work. But they don't want to listen to data or science because we have a faith-based group running this country, and this is in large part what we're hoping to change.
Well, I noticed that members of some factions in the religious right and even some mainstream have this feeling that there's a scientific conspiracy to rule out, to lead people away from God, and actually basically that scientists admit that they don't know. If there's I can't imagine a whole world of scientists getting together they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it because I think the whole point of science is to keep fighting what is known,
Yeah, and we have a scientific consensus by scientists in the U.S., in Russia, in Israel, in Iran, in Pakistan. They all are saying the same thing scientifically, whereas those countries' politicians are so different theologically that we have evidence, which makes it easy. When there's no evidence for a deity, people can make up whatever they want and hold strong to it and feel we don't want to hear evidence because that might change. If people change their religious views based on scientific evidence, that's up to them. We don't want to say you must not believe in God in order to follow evolution. And so many religious people still accept God and evolution and maybe think God did it. That's up to them. We have other views about how evolution came along, but at least look at the scientific data instead of just putting your head in the sand and calling it some scientific conspiracy.
Or saying that science is a religion unto itself.
Right.
And there are people that believe that the purpose of evolution is to lead people away from God, try to prove that there is no God, which of course has nothing to do with it because science isn't God-based. According to David Eller, actually it's atheistic in the sense that it just simply doesn't think of God into the equation at all. It's not against God.
Right.
It just doesn't. It has nothing to do with coming to scientific conclusions.
Just like I teach calculus, and there are some religious colleagues who teach calculus, but we teach it essentially the same way because God doesn't enter into it. Maybe some of my students try praying before an exam and eventually find out that God didn't answer their prayers.
Right, and you don't need God. Nobody complains because God isn't involved in the science, in the atomic theory or the theory of gravity.
Right.
There's no God concept in geology and any of the other sciences. So,
and just like several hundred years ago, there was talk that we godless scientists are saying that the Earth isn't the center of the universe and the sun doesn't revolve around the Earth. Now, even those heirs to that religious right have come around because of such overwhelming evidence. They look foolish. And I imagine in 100 years or so, even those holding on to the conspiracy of evolution who are laughed at now by most of the rest of the world, will give up on that and maybe will apologize for what they did to science in our era.
I think the apologizing is probably a bit too much to hope for. I don't think that'll...
I guess I was thinking of the Pope apologizing for what they did to Galileo. Maybe they overreached a little.
Yeah. Well, you know, what you say is true in that most mainstream, I think all mainstream religions accept the theory of evolution as the best explanation for the development of life. Even the most, say, there was a group of rabbis that just issued a statement recently in support of evolution. As you mentioned, the Catholic Church supports evolution. Mainstream Protestants support evolution. Basically, what I think has happened with the evolution issue is that a small group of fundamentalist Protestants have kind of hijacked this issue and forced it on everyone else. So actually, it's a very small group of Christian fundamentalists have kind of hijacked that issue.
Even some of these fundamentalists are slightly moving away when they were years ago sticking to a 6,000-year-old universe.
Right.
Now there's just so much overwhelming evidence they are starting to reinterpret Genesis. Like the first day, well, the day may not have been 24 hours, it could have been thousands of years. So they're gradually starting to say, well, maybe we should follow some of this science stuff.
Right. Well, less of the emergence of old Earth creationism as opposed to young Earth creationism, and there has been some capitulation in that they're willing to support what they call microevolution, but not macroevolution. The fallacy of that being, of course, is that evolution is evolution.
Yeah. And they're trying to just see portions of the Bible that would be consistent with evolution, but still keep God in it. Whereas scientists may be believers or not, but they still look at the evidence. And if they found evidence for God doing something, fine, but there's never been any evidence for God in anything pertaining to science. Right. And we should not leave the science to fundamentalists to decide.
Or to whatever superstition or unverifiable answer that people come up with.
And in South Carolina, some of the fundamentalists, you asked about evolution, they're so afraid of it that now they're homeschooling. And I wish we had higher standards for some of the homeschooling where they may not believe that evolution is fact, but they should at least understand the rudiments of it, which they don't.
Well, see, that's the thing is that I think on the face of it that like we said before, there's nothing about the theory of evolution or any other scientific school of thought that would necessarily preclude the idea of God because it takes no position on God. On the other hand, little Johnny goes to school and learns through evolution that species, diversify through this process and that process, and then goes home and then goes to church with his parents on Sunday and gets the God did it explanation. That's going to create a certain amount of conflict in the home. So it's, looking at it from their point, it is kind of a threat.
Well, it's not to liberal theologists or deists who might say, God put some natural laws in and let things take over. But for fundamentalists who believe that God put a soul into humans and distinguished humans and all other species from each other, this scientific evidence that conflicts with that, and that's what gets them angry at scientists, because they're hurting the moral fabric of our country. They're not pointing out scientific evidence to the contrary. They just don't like to have this evidence come out.
Right. Well, I think that stems from the religious tradition of wedding moral values with the literal description of how, with an existential position on how the world began and developed. And I think that mainstream and liberal religious denominations, they can make that transition. You know, I've often said that I think people compartmentalize that. You know, you have your church on Sunday, your synagogue on Saturday, whatever, and while you're there, it's an emotional thing. And then you go back home and you go to work and you live in the real world.
I was once on a radio talk show in South Carolina, and somebody called in and saying that, you know, since you're an atheist, you could probably go out and rape and murder and do whatever you can get away with. And my response was, with an attitude like that, I hope you continue to believe in God.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, to me, the moral thing is to do what's right because it's the right thing to do, not because of fear of eternal damnation.
And there is a biological evolutionary basis for morality.
Right.
That people who tend to act moral, human beings that are morally inclined tend to select for other human beings that are morally inclined, and as a result, the whole species has kind of moved in that direction.
Yeah, and there are probably early human types that would just go around killing each other and for the joy of it, and obviously they no longer survive.
They didn't survive because, well, you know, morality is a form of cooperation, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we're not really doing, what we're doing is basically what lots of other species do, just that we're doing it on an intellectual, on a more of an advanced level. Even crocodiles have a pecking order.
But there are some people who are doing the right thing and fear that others won't unless you instill the fear of God in them. So that's why God is made up to keep people moral, saying without God, people would just do all kinds of immoral things. And I think we need to get our secular message out about the value that we place in human rights and in good works, that's something that the religious community has pushed, that all the good that they've done in helping individuals and very often hurting individuals, but they don't hear from the atheist community about our values and how we've done humankind remarkably good things, and how many atheists and humanists were leaders in science and other fields that have helped. And I think we need to get that message out to the culture.
Right, and in fact, when there have been some very important scientific discoveries made by religious people, but usually it was they had to go against their own religious hierarchy in order to do it and get away with it. Certainly, Galileo is a great example of that. I also, just to what you mentioned before, you know, as far as atheist and morality, you notice that most of the people in prison in this country profess a belief in God of some kind.
Yeah, I've even said that the highest percentage of believers are politicians and prisoners.
Yeah.
And both, some might not be, but both feel that's either the way to get elected or the way to get paroled, because somebody in prison might not be a believer, but come in front of the parole board and say, yeah, I'm an atheist, rather than I found God in prison.
Well, you know, I don't know about you, but I have the sense that at this point in our national politics with Barack Obama and John McCain, I have a feeling that both of them would kind of prefer to leave the religious issue alone.
Yeah.
But because of the proclivity, I guess, of the national mood, everybody's got to wrap themselves up in God
Well, that's why, like, when the Secular Coalition put out a contest for the highest-ranking non-theist, we had one member of Congress, Representative Pete Stark from California, is the first openly non-theistic member of Congress. Privately, we know of about 27, 28 others, but they're afraid to come out. Maybe some will after the next election, and we're trying to change the culture so people can be comfortable coming out to show their values and not pander to those people who will only vote for somebody who claims to be religious. It just fosters hypocrisy in our country.
Briefly, kind of sum up, where do you see the Secular Coalition of America, and in fact the entire secular movement? What short-term goals do you have?
Well, our mission is to increase respectability and visibility of non-theists and to protect our separation of church and state. And we're trying to get more media attention, cooperating with organizations. We're trying to help all the 9 organizations that are part of our movement, and they're trying to help us. So this working together, I think, can help change our culture. We're also, of course, lobbying in Congress and working in Congress with other organizations so they recognize we exist. We're trying to get atheists to come out of the closet. That worked for the gay rights movement, which still has problems, but at least there's even a log cabin Republicans.
Right.
And we can't even get, we tried at the Democratic Convention to get, when there was this faith breakfast, turn it into a faith and values, which they initially talked about, but they backed away. So we want to be included in the body politic and change our culture through politics so that not just like tenured math professors can openly be atheists, but people in all walks of life without that kind of discrimination.
And hopefully by the 2009 Atheist Alliance International Convention, we will have made significant progress in that direction.
Well, we're starting to make progress, and I hope the slope increases where we make continually more progress.
Well,